Baik, Bapak Ibu, kita akan segera mulai acaranya. Insyaallah sudah bergabung semua ya. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Zubaidah, and I'm excited to be your host for this event. Selamat siang, Bapak Ibu semuanya. Terima kasih sudah hadir di acara webinar kita hari ini. Your participation is greatly appreciated, and we are so glad that you could be here with us. Today's webinar topic revolves around Indonesia renewable potential and sustainable energy optimization toward net zero emission by 2060. Selama acara ini berlangsung, kita akan mengeksplor potensi energi terbarukan di Indonesia and discussing various strategies and solutions that can help our government to overcome these challenges. Join with us today is Dr. Supriyadi, Chairman of the Energy, Konversi, and Konservasi Research Center, and great speaker, Mr. J.K.A, PhD candidate from Delft University of Technology, and also join with us Mr. Joko Santosa, Energy Planning Expert from National Innovation Research Agency. Our discussion event today will be hosted by Dr. Arif Heru Kunchoro as moderator. Before the discussion begins, we ask Dr. Supriyadi to give opening remarks to our webinar today. Kepada Pak Chu, kami persilakan. Silakan Pak Chu.
Terima kasih, Bu Wis. Suara saya terdengar?
Terdengar jelas Pak Chu.
Oke, bismillah. Our honor guest, more specific to Kepala Organisasi Riset Energi dan Manufaktur BRIN, Chair of the Research Organization for Energy and Manufaktur, Kepala Pusat Riset di Lingkungan BRIN, Head of Research Center in BRIN, Mr. Langer and Pak Joko as presenter, webinar committee, and all webinar participants. Good afternoon, Assalamualaikum, and may peace be upon us. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, dear ladies and gentlemen, saya akan mulai dengan pantun ya, Bu Is ya. I will start with pantun. Ke lapangan mengembala keledai, bawa unta ke tengah gurun. Sebelum sambutan kita mulai, izinkan saya membawakan pantun. And then I would like to give the pantun in English. Yellow is the color of honey. The color of sky is blue. Here we talk about energy.
Orang sini semua, Pak.
All of you. Halo? Bapak, Ibu yang saya hormati, dear ladies and gentlemen, saat ini pemerintah Indonesia berkomitmen penuh untuk mengatasi permasalahan perubahan iklim ya, sebagaimana tertuang dalam strategi jangka panjang Indonesia untuk rendah karbon dan ketahanan iklim. Currently, the government of Indonesia is fully committed to addressing climate change issues as stated in Indonesia long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience. It is hoped that the net zero emission target can be achieved in 2060 or sooner by reducing the use of fossil resources, including coal, optimizing new and renewable energy, increasing the electric vehicle utilization, application of carbon capture utilization and storage, or we call the CCUS, to mitigate the greenhouse gas emission in the industrial and power generation sector, and so on. Seperti kita ketahui, tantangan besar yang harus dilakukan pemerintah Indonesia dan pemangku kepentingan terkait saat ini adalah merumuskan strategi terbaik untuk memenuhi kebutuhan investasi dengan menonaktifkan pembangkit listrik berbasis batu bara dan menjajaki metode lain dalam proses transisi energi dengan biaya lebih rendah. As we know that the big challenge that the government of Indonesia and related stakeholders have to do at this time is to formulate the best strategy to meet investment need to deactivate coal-based power plant and explore other methods of energy transition processes at lower cost. In this regard, the Research Center for Energy Conversion and Konservasi BRIN and Delft University of Technology have initiated the webinar in the context of Indonesia renewable potential and sustainable energy optimization toward net zero emission by 2060. The first presenters, Mr. Langer, PhD candidate from Delft University of Technology, will deliver research topic about the technical and economic potential of renewables in Indonesia and scenarios for power system decarbonization. Then Pak Joko Santosa from Research Center for Energy Conversion and Konservasi will continue to present about the optimization of sustainable electricity power system toward net zero emission by 2060 in Indonesia. Kami berharap webinar hari ini bermanfaat untuk semua, untuk kehidupan yang lebih baik dan bagi generasi mendatang. We hope that the webinar today can be a valuable reference for stakeholders, policy makers, as well as the society to find better solution to benefit future generation. Ikan hiu makan tomat, thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya kembalikan ke Pak Kuis.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya terlewat juga pantunnya nih Pak Cuk. Okay, we will continue to with the main agenda presentation session, which will be guided by Dr. Arif. Kepada Pak Arif, kami persilahkan Pak Arif. Di mute Pak Arif. Oh sudah ya, di ruangan, maaf.
Oke, halo. Halo.
Ya,
Apakah
sudah
sudah
cukup
terdengar?
jelas, Pak.
Jelas.
Yang kami hormati Bapak Kapusris, Bapak Supriyadi Nandar, Bapak Ibu sekalian, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen in Indonesia, and good morning for Mr. Jenis Lenger in Netherlands. I think in Netherlands still at 8 at PM. Welcome to the Energy and Manufaktur or ENMA webinar series, National Research and Innovation Agency BRIN. The topic of webinar is the Indonesia's renewables potential and sustainable energy optimization toward net zero emission by 2060. My name is Arif Herukontoro, and I'll be your moderator in this webinar. Before we start, let me quickly go over today's agenda. Firstly, Mr. J.K.A. Lenger will deliver the presentation during 25 minutes. And then Mr. Joko Santosa, Joko Santosa will deliver the presentation during 25 minutes. After that, we will open the floor for questions and discussion during 45 minutes. Now let me introduce our speaker, Mr. J.K.A. Lenger. Hello, Mr. Jenis.
Halo, selamat siang, Bapak dan Ibu-Ibu sekalian.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to introduce your curriculum vitae. He is a PhD candidate at Delft University of Technology, the huge South Holland, Netherlands. He is also as project manager and also consultant in the industry. His activities include implementation of rooftop solar PV, battery storage, and electric vehicle charging station, as well as consultation on energy law and also business cases. And he has published several articles on this subject. He has graduated from Bachelor of Engineering for Mechanical Engineering from Ausbildungstechnische Hochschule Regensburg, Germany, and Master of Science for Sustainable Energy Technology from Delft University of Technology, Netherlands, and PhD candidate for Engineering System and Services from Delft University of Technology, Netherlands. Mr. Dennis also has married to Indonesia, so he can speak bahasa Indonesia. Thank you. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Dennis Lenger to deliver the presentation with the technical and economic potential of renewables in Indonesia and scenarios for power system decarbonization. Mr. Dennis Lenger, please.
All right, thank you, Pa Ari, for this nice introduction. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly humbled to speak here in front of you today. Unfortunately, my Bahasa is quite rusty and only enough to say good afternoon. The presentation will still be in English. Sorry for that. I think I'm still disabled to share my screen. Can that perhaps be changed? I cannot share my screen yet.
Oh, yeah.
Or should I just say next slide, next slide?
You can.
Mas Apri, mohon dibantu Mas Apri untuk enable-nya. Share screen-nya Mas
Okay,
Apri.
yeah. Now it works perfect. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? All right. Okay, so if everyone can see the screen, I'm very, very happy to present basically a summary of my PhD work over the last 3 years. It's a very condensed presentation, so I'm sure many of you will have lots of questions, so feel free to ask them either during the presentation or afterwards. So before I start talking about my research, let me introduce myself also from my side a little bit. So as Pa-Arif already said, I'm Jannis Lange. I'm a PhD candidate at TU Delft in the Netherlands. I'm not Dutch, I'm German. But you know, I just live in the Netherlands already for 5 years, and there my expertise are basically the mapping of renewable energy resources using GIS software or geoinformation systems software. Also economic and financial analysis and energy system modeling. You will see all of that stuff throughout the presentation. So now you're wondering, okay, what is a German doing with the Indonesian energy transition? What's the link? As Pa-Arif already pointed out, I'm married to an Indonesian since more than 3 years. This is me and her enjoying a late summer afternoon in the Netherlands. I can also speak Bahasa a little bit. And I love ayam geprek. It's like one of my favorite dishes there is. So what I want to say is, with everything I do for the Indonesian energy transition, I really have in mind, okay, how can it benefit my wife, my family in Indonesia, my parents-in-law, for example, my friends there. So there's a personal and a professional drive that motivates me to find solutions for the Indonesian energy transition. The PhD research that I'm talking about today is basically separated in 2 parts. Part number 1 are the renewable energy resources, and part 2 is using those resources and seeing, okay, how can Indonesia move away from fossil fuels towards fully renewable energy system. This is a highly interesting topic because, in principle, Indonesia is very rich in renewable energy resources. So here you can see a couple of pictures. You have solar PV, wind, hydropower, and even geothermal and ocean energies. So in Europe, we barely have any geothermal, and Indonesia is truly blessed with energy from the ground, which is pretty amazing. And also ocean energies. So we're talking here about wave power, tidal power, and also something called ocean thermal energy conversion. That's also next to Indonesian research. Ocean thermal energy conversion is one of my key expertises. So we've dived a little bit deeper into that topic as well, and I can talk a little bit about that later. So, but although Indonesia in principle has lots of renewable energy resources, the energy transition is still moving in Indonesia, and coal and natural gas are still pretty strong logically. So the questions that I've been addressing throughout my research were, Indonesia has large potentials, but how large are those renewable energy resources? Where are they located throughout the more than 14,000 islands across Indonesia? How economically viable are they? Can those potentials meet present and future electricity demand? And how can these renewables be integrated into the power system to make sure that demand is met at all times? Maybe to explain what I mean with potentials, a little explanation. You can see it like an onion, basically. Like an onion has several layers, and you have an outer layer, and then you move further and further into the deeper layers. And it's the same with the potentials. You start with the very outer layer, the theoretical potential, which is basically hypothetically, if we would cover all the land area with solar panels, or we would cover all the marine area in the sea with offshore turbines, what is the potential? In practically speaking, it's not really a useful number, because you have forests, you have cities, you have sacred temples that you have to take into account. So you cannot place generators everywhere you want. And in order to take that into account, we also look into the technical potential, which is basically excluding areas that are not suitable for renewables. So for example, renewables must be placed outside of cities, outside of peatland areas, for example, in Kalimantan, or nature protection areas. That does not say anything about the economic side of the renewables yet, so we also look into the economic potential. The economic potential is the part of the technical potential that also takes into account how much the electricity actually costs to produce. You can do that from a general or socio-economic perspective. So you have, for example, a social discount rate. But if you want to do that analysis from a private economic standpoint, for example, from an investor's perspective or from a banking perspective, you can do that with the bankable potential. Then you also take into account loans, tax payments, stuff like that. So this is basically the potentials that we were working with. And without getting too much into the technicalities of how we conducted the research, let me just show you the results right away. So here you can see a map of Indonesia with all the renewable energy resources that we mapped ourselves. Let me just quickly show you with the laser pointer which technologies there are. So you see here solar PV in yellow, onshore wind in green, offshore wind in purple, and as blue dots, OTEC. If you're wondering where is geothermal, where is biomass, we did take that into account for the energy system modeling, but due to time reasons and data availability, we did not map those resources ourselves. Instead, we took the data from the ESDM and incorporated that into our models. Here, as said, we only show the renewables that we mapped ourselves. And you can see some interesting things. So, for example, offshore wind, we mapped quite extensively across the entire country. You can see here the harbor of Surabaya with those fingers. Those are basically shipping routes. So we are basically saying offshore wind, if it's implemented, should not interfere with national and international shipping routes. This rectangle here is a marine protected area. I think it's a coral reef, but I'm not fully sure. In any case, marine protected areas are also not chosen. And you can also see, like, between the coastline, there's like a little gap, for example, here in Papua. That's like a visual impact layer of 10 kilometers. So say if we are like in Bali or in Lombok and we say, okay, the tourists should not see offshore wind turbines on the horizon, that is accounted for as well. So you see, both on land and on the sea, we have quite a bunch of exclusion criteria where we say no renewables should be implemented there. And even though we have those constraints, we found that technically speaking, renewables are quite massive in Indonesia across the entire country. So you can generate almost 18,000 terawatt hours per year with those renewables. And to put that into perspective, that's like 9 to 14 times the projected 2050 demand in Indonesia. So, for example, in the Rencana Umum Energi Nasional, they estimated what the electricity demand in 2050 might be. The Badan Energi Nasional also did that. They had like certain estimations what the demand in the future could be. And if we compare the national energy potentials with the national demand, we see the resources are enough to cover that demand. We also compared with the global demand of electricity, and those resources that Indonesia has alone could cover 75% of global electricity demand. That's really a high number. That means Indonesia can very easily, in terms of resources, become completely independent of the entire world in terms of electricity production. What's also very nice is that the resources are quite complementary. And what I mean with that is that in almost every area you have some sort of renewable being suitable. That is most noticeable, again, offshore. So in areas where you have offshore wind, you cannot implement OTEC, so ocean thermal energy conversion. And in areas where OTEC is possible, offshore wind is not possible. So, you know, it's like a balance, you know. In almost every area, you have some sort of electricity available. If you're, again, wondering what OTEC is, OTEC basically uses the heat stored in the ocean to produce electricity. It's a base load generator, so you don't have like fluctuations like solar PV. It's a very predictable type of electricity production. The only catch is that OTEC does not exist commercially yet, so it still needs to be developed in the future. Also, another thing is you might have noticed that there's barely any yellow coloring on Java. And that is because Java is already economically used, like in terms of land. So you have much land that is already used for agriculture, for forest. You have big cities like Jakarta and Bandung, of course. You have volcanoes. That means all these lands are not available for solar PV unless you chop down forests or you take the land away from farmers, which is certainly not desirable. So we see that limited land is available for technologies like solar PV. And the reason why this logic does not apply to onshore wind is because, technically speaking, you can implement onshore turbines in the middle of a forest. You can put the turbines next to agricultural land. So onshore wind is a little bit more flexible in terms of implementation, which is not so easy for solar PV. So this is the technical side of things. Now let's look at the economic side of things. And I must say that for most parts of my PhD, we worked with the old BPP tariff scheme, so the Biaya Pokok Penyediaan scheme. And with that scheme, the situation looks like this, that all of a sudden, most of the resources are gone. And the reason for that, before I talk about the reasons, but even though most of the resources are now gone, you still have lots and lots of resources that you could use to cover demand. So you can see that from an economic side, you still have like roughly 7,000 terawatt hours of electricity per year, and you can still meet future demand with those resources. And now let me talk about the reasons why those resources are now so low. The reason is that the PPP tariff scheme is too low in fluctuating in areas like Java and Sumatra, where the PPP is basically based on subsidized coal power. So the renewables had to compete against tariffs of like 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And under the current conditions of renewables in Indonesia, that was not economic. Whereas in the eastern part of Indonesia, there are many expensive diesel generators. You can expect BPP tariffs of up to 17 cents per kilowatt hour, and that was then economic. However, since last year, there's a feed-in tariff-based scheme, and we think that's a really promising and good move because that really activated economic potential throughout the entire country, because now solar PV can also expect tariffs of 10 cents and more on islands like Java, and then you can perhaps ensure an economic case throughout the entire country. So this is about the resources. Now let's move to the energy system modeling. So here you can see another map of Indonesia, but now it looks a little bit different. So now let's walk through that. So for the energy system modeling and for the scenarios for full power decarbonization, we basically take the Indonesian transmission grid, simplify it, and then see, okay, how can those resources that I showed earlier be incorporated into the electricity grid to meet demand. And we study two different networks of transmission grid in Indonesia. The first network is only the orange lines, like not the green lines that you see here, but only the orange lines based on the PLN RUPTL 2021 till 2030. There, for example, PLN plans to connect all of the Kalimantan provinces, amongst others, and also the Papua Barat and Papua grids. In this topology, most of the Indonesian islands remain disconnected from each other. The only islands that are connected are Bali and Java, as well as Bangka and Sumatra. The second configuration that we study in our paper also includes the green lines. And let me say here that this concept was not made by us, but by an office of the Energy Ministry, so ESDM. Last year, TU Delft visited ITB for a symposium, and there they were so kind to show us this concept that was made for the G20 in Indonesia last year. And we took that concept and studied that in more detail. So this is basically the Indonesian supergrid of the future envisioned by the ESDM. So the major goal of one of the major goals of our research was to see, okay, what is the impact of those inter-island transmission lines? How useful are they for the Indonesian energy transition? Another key element of the research was the cost assumptions. So here on this right graph, you see the capital expenses or investment costs of renewables before 2016 and after 2016. You have the fossil generators like coal and gas, but also a bunch of renewables. And the thing that I want to mention is that the cost estimations from research to research can be quite different. And you can see that, especially for solar PV, if I point this out, if the research uses cost estimations from before 2016, the cost can be very, very high. But if you use more recent up-to-date costs after 2016, the costs are much lower, but you still see there's quite a range of possible costs. So our goal for energy system optimization modeling was not to use just one set of cost assumptions, but we use a whole range of costs, because will solar PV be cheap in Indonesia? Will it be expensive? What about nuclear power? How much will that cost? We just don't know yet in 2050. So we want to see, okay, for different costs, what the outcomes will be. So let me show you the results of that. And I must say, this is a work in progress. So please don't use those results for your own reports or for your own communication, because I'm quite sure with further revisions, the results might change. But still, I can talk about the overall results. So this graph here shows two columns. The column on the left shows the results for the electricity grid without the island links. So Kalimantan is isolated, Java is isolated, Sumatra is isolated. And on the right-hand side, we see the results for if there's the Indonesian supergrid, basically, where all the islands are connected. For one, we can see that a fully decarbonized system can be possible, but that you need island links for that. The reason why I say this is, if you don't have island links, in 2015, there is this blue dot popping up, and that blue dot means unmet demand. Unmet demand means that there are not enough renewable energy resources somewhere to meet demand. That means that, for example, something needs to be shut down, or that, the demand can just not be delivered. And we found that this happens in Java, because on Java, you have limited land for solar PV. You have to rely on offshore wind, on biomass, geothermal to meet demand. And when demand grows in the future, eventually there's just not enough renewable energy resources to cover that. And because you have to use expensive offshore wind, expensive ocean thermal energy conversion, you see that, if you don't have island links, the system costs would grow exponentially, and electricity would become quite expensive. However, if you have island links, our model showed that not only can you meet demand fully and without any problems, so you see there's not any blue dot to be seen, and you have declining system costs over time. And the reason is because you can basically use the most economic resources throughout the entire country and supply the electricity where it is needed. For example, in West Kalimantan, the solar PV resources are really, really good. So if you have a link from West Kalimantan to Jakarta or to Banten, then you can use the cheapest electricity and you can still meet demand. So here you can see at the 2050 situation with island links for alternative scenarios. So not only did we play around with the costs and with the transmission grid, but we also, for example, use different power production profiles. We use different demand profiles just to see, okay, what is the impact on our results. You can see that our system is mostly depending on solar PV as generation and pumped hydro as storage. So Indonesia has lots and lots of pumped hydro potential, which can be used, to balance the fluctuations of PV production from day and night, and also from dry and rainy season. We see that, okay, PV is the one key element, but the other key element are actually biomass and geothermal and also large hydro to some extent, because regardless of the scenarios and the cost assumptions, you always have a certain share of baseload geothermal and biomass. And if you say, okay, solar PV, I get it, it's an interesting technology, but it's not so easy in Indonesia. We also prepared some systems that have low shares of PV, and those come at a certain cost. So the scenario with low shares of solar PV is by far the most expensive one, but it also has benefits. Because the issue with solar PV and storage is that you need critical raw materials, to make the panels. And 1 megawatt of solar is not the same as 1 megawatt of coal or nuclear for that matter. So in order to cover the same amount of electricity demand, you need more capacity of solar PV than you would need the capacity for coal. So what I want to say is, if you have low shares of solar PV, then you also have a lower installed capacity in your system. And that can be nice in terms of grid stability, that can be nice in terms of material use, critical raw materials that need to be mined. So that can have benefits as well. To wrap up my talk, here are the key results and the conclusions. So in technical terms, the renewable energy resources are sufficient to meet future demand. Most resources are located offshore or on untouched land in East Indonesia. Islands with little available land, like Java or Bali, would benefit from inter-island power lines. However, the economic potential, at least with the BPP tariff scheme, was mostly focused on rural East, where the demand was low but tariffs high. But with the new feed-in tariff scheme introduced last year, we are more optimistic about that. We recommend the following policies, as said, like adequate and stable tariffs, just like with the feed-in tariff. That's a very nice step in order to build investors' confidence and also the developers' confidence to invest and to develop in Indonesia. We argue that a temporary lift of the local content rule could be useful while the solar PV industry is being developed in Indonesia. So our argumentation is Indonesia could perhaps learn from international expertise, scale up the manufacturing capacity in Indonesia, and then once Indonesia has enough manufacturing capacity to build the PV panels themselves, then the local content rule kicks back in. But to get things started, we say maybe a temporary lift might be nice. And also let me be clear, the temporary lift is only for the solar PV panels, not for the installation and stuff. So the system should still be installed and maintained by Indonesian workers, but only the panels should be bought perhaps from international markets for the time being. We also think capacity building in the Indonesian banking sector might be very useful. because we saw that the Indonesian banking sector is very active in the energy field, just not with solar PV or with onshore wind, because they don't have experience with that yet. However, if the Indonesian banking sector has experience with renewables, then we can really argue that the energy transition is not only made in Indonesia, but also financed by Indonesia, meaning that all the profits made by renewables actually stay within the country and don't flow to foreign investors. So that really Indonesia's economy can grow and progress from Indonesia by themselves. That's one thing, but like in order to keep the plants operating when they're installed, we also say that installation service hubs across Indonesia might be nice, so not only on Java but also the other main islands. And we believe that could create thousands, if not hundreds and thousands of jobs, not only in Java but really the entire country, and might perhaps also create perspectives to move away from the fossil fuel industry towards the renewable energy industry. So as said, it was a quite condensed talk. If you are interested to learn more about our research, I refer to the references and also links to the project homepage, our master thesis reports, and also my Google Scholar account. And I'm looking forward very much to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janis, for your informative and interesting presentation. And we wish, after finish your dissertation, please share your knowledge with us through the webinar again. Yeah. Okay?
For sure, yeah, let's do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Well, baik Bapak Ibu sekalian, untuk pembicara kedua ini adalah Bapak Insinyur Joko Santoso M.Sc. Sorry, yeah. And beliau bekerja di BPPT, sekarang BRIN sejak tahun 92, jadi sudah 31 tahun. Dan jabatan beliau adalah Analisis Kebijakan Bidang Energi. Adapun spesialisasinya adalah konversi, konservasi energi, perencanaan energi, dan juga pemodelan energi. Beliau anggota juga di tim teknis pemodelan energi di Kementerian Energi dan Sumber Daya Mineral. Selain itu, pengalaman beliau bekerja sama ini cukup banyak, antara lain adalah dengan Kementerian SDM, kemudian Pertamina, PLN, UNDP, kemudian USAID, GIZ, CLAS, dan kemudian J.K.A, Danish Energy Agency. Beliau juga aktif dalam penulisan artikel terkait konservasi energi, perencanaan energi, dan juga untuk pemodelan energi. Adapun latar belakang beliau adalah untuk pendidikan, itu lulus sarjana teknik nuklir dari Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta. Kemudian beliau mempunyai 2 pendidikan master, yaitu Master of Mechanical Engineering dari Texas A&M University, USA, dan juga Master of Mathematics, Technische Universität Kaiserslautern, Jerman. Very difficult spelling. Baik, Bapak-Ibu sekalian, kami mengundang Bapak Joko Santosa untuk menyampaikan presentasi terkait the optimization of sustainable electricity power system towards net zero emission by 2060 in Indonesia. Kepada Pak Joko, Kami persilahkan.
Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Arief. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam hormat, salam sejahtera, salam sehat Bapak Ibu semuanya, khususnya buat Pak Kapus, Pak Cuk. Ya. Jadi terima kasih Bapak Ibu semuanya juga. Terima kasih sudah memberi kesempatan pada kami untuk memberikan presentasi pada acara webinar series ENMA. Saya akan mencoba menyampaikan presentasi dalam bahasa Inggris, ya. Tapi mungkin nanti akan sedikit, seandainya kesulitan mencari kosakatanya, akan saya campur dengan bahasa Indonesia. Mohon maaf. Oke, terima kasih. Good morning, Pak Yanis. Nice to meet you. Yeah. I'm trying to give the presentation in English, but yeah, please. I'm sorry if maybe if I've got the vocabulary and then I use Indonesian language in the presentation. So I hope you don't mind. But I'm trying to present to give the presentation in English.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me share the screen. Okay, cool. Maybe I should. Share screen. Okay, I hope you all see the presentation and also hear my voice. Okay, the title of our presentation now is the optimization of the sustainable power generation system towards net zero emissions by 2060 in Indonesia. I'm going to start with the background personally. Yeah. First, with the energy and environment indicator. If we there are final energy consumption, final energy per capita, final energy intensity, primary energy consumption, primary energy per capita consumption, energy per capita, greenhouse gas emission, and greenhouse gas emissions per capita for about 20 years. Yeah. If I convert this number into index, and then we will be easier to see and to compare this among these numbers. If you see in the indicator indexes, the electricity consumption, the greenhouse gas emission, and electricity consumption per capita growth are the highest among other indicators. So it means that we have to focus on electricity sector, power sectors, because the growth is these indicators are higher than other indicators. You see in the energy intensity, the trend is decreasing, but after that it's increasing. Yeah. So this is because of the rapid basic metal industry smelter expansion, and this give impacts on the greenhouse gas emissions. We know that nickel is one type of high energy intensive energy industries. So that's why if you see in the final energy intensity, it's going up a little bit, yeah, after 2018. Okay, this is The first is about the indicators, and then the second is what about the current power sector situation in Indonesia. Yeah, this is all the background of our study this year. So if you see the sales, electricity sales until 27 is quite the growth is quite high, is 6.3% per year. But after that, for the last 5 years, yeah, the sales was decreasing to 4.2% per year. Yeah. So because there's lots of reason explanation about why it's decreasing, because maybe we are approaching 100% electrification ratio, yeah, or maybe there is lifestyle changes, or maybe for the price, or maybe from the other things that we should examine thoroughly about this. Is why the sales was now is less than before, or maybe now there is a lot of so then that's also impact on the PLN sales, PLN electricity sales also. But what about the power plants? Now the share of renewable energy, renewable capacity is just 15.1%. The rest is fossil power plants, yeah, in 2020. But and also the production, electricity production, the contribution of renewable energy is just 19.7%, and the rest is electricity produced by fossil power plants. It's good, but it was good. It's good news because the renewable energy share for the last 7 years is increasing now. Yeah, but yeah, the share of renewable energy is still low. Now, what about our neighborhood countries? Are we? Where are we? Where is Indonesian position in terms of renewable energy? If you see this graph, yeah, we are just better than Singapore and Brunei. Other ASEAN countries has higher renewable energy share. Yeah. Yeah, but and then another thing that we should think about. We should must Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines dominate the number of solar and wind power capacity addition in the last 5 years. So it's the situation now in the ASEAN power sector mix, and this is the figure in 2020. And this is also the one background that we should think about, because the reason we conduct the study is because of global climate change. Yeah? Global climate change. Yeah? Indonesia has submitted enhanced 2022 that the reduction rate has been revised to 31.9%, 43.2% with international support in 2030. It is predicted that the first NDC that we have submitted about a couple years ago, would not be able to keep the global. So now what about the methodology of our study? Yeah, first, of course, we have we should have analytical framework. Yeah, here we we use analysis on energy supply and demand with LEAP integrated energy model. Yeah, and of course, this is the flow, yeah, from the energy analysis, yeah, and then goes to the energy transformation analysis, and then we should do analysis primary energy supply. Okay, first we are going to do I'm going to explain how do we do the final energy analysis. Of course, yeah, the best way to formulate strategy to meet energy demand in the phase uncertainty is to develop several projected scenarios. Yeah? In this study, we developed 3 scenarios: business as usual, net zero emission, the last different approach. Yeah, we are using a multi-region approach. But this year, especially for this presentation, I'm going to present is just the approach is just based on single region, yeah. Just based on single region, not multi-region, because this is based on for the multi-region approach is still ongoing, yeah, is still in progress. Yeah, so there's in this presentation in this presentation we use approach of single region, Indonesia as a single region. For the business as usual scenario, of course, we develop new intervention from the government, yeah, related to the sector energy policy. The energy policy and related programs implemented are just a continuation of historical trends. Something. And what about the net zero emission scenario? Yeah, besides using assumption, yeah, basic assumption as the business as usual scenario, we apply additional assumption like related to strategies like achieving to achieve net zero emission, like phase out coal-fired power plants and other like gas and oil, and accelerated development of renewable energy plants, yeah, more intensive application of energy technology, and then implementation of plants with we use okay. Okay. Yeah. So based on World Bank study, if we want to escape from middle income trap. So the GDP per capita should be around $12,000 per capita. And our government have a vision to realize this before 2045. That's why in this study, in the energy model, NZ energy model, we use quite high GDP projection because of this government's vision about escaping from middle income trap. So it's just around 6% per year until 2045. Of course, to demand analysis, yeah, we need to break down. We need to have a number of sectors. Yeah, we have 4 sectors: manufacturing, transportation, commercial, and others. Why we need to break down into these sectors? Because every sector has a different trend, energy. Yes. Energy consumption, energy intensity. So that's why we need to break down into different sector. And in the graph, you would see that there will be economical structure changes. The share of the commercial sector will be increasing. The share of the industry is keep constant, and for the other sectors like mining, construction, and agriculture, the share in these 3 sectors are decreasing. Transport sector is a little bit increasing, not much. Of course, we need to get the elasticity, GDP elasticity, because what we have it's just a basic assumption of GDP projection, GDP growth. So we need to have elasticity, GDP elasticity, to find the growth for each sector. If based on the historical data, if you see here, the elasticity for industrial, commercial, other sector, and transport, we can assume to be constant. There is short, there is dip because of like economic crisis, financial crisis, and COVID pandemic. But after that, the economic situation will go back to normal. Yeah, and then the elasticity, GDP elasticity will be have the same value, something similar. Yeah, it'll be similar. So this is how we assume. So, for example, if the economy grew 6%, and then the industrial elasticity with the elasticity of 1 has the same growth. But if commercial elasticity has the value of 1.2, then if economy grew 6% per year, and then commercial sector will grow 6 times 1.2, something like that. Yeah. Of course, to do energy modeling, we need a reference energy system that describe the energy flow from the upstream to downstream. Yeah, from the primary energy supply to the energy demand. Yeah, this is the our reference energy system. Yeah, yeah, we break down the conversion technologies. Yeah, refineries, pure energy plant, energy replacement. Also, power plants. Yeah. What about demand technologies? We break down into transport, commercial, industry, others, and household. And then we break down again into more detailed technologies. Yeah, which using different type of energy like petroleum product, gas, LPG, and others. What about the method, the the modeling methodology. LEAP model is able to support a number of different modeling technology, like top-down, bottom-up, and hybrid, with different projection methodologies such as time series, econometric, and use and stock turnover. In this time, in this study, we use bottom-up approach, which is end-use analysis. This is just multiplication between activity and intensity, energy activity and energy activity. For the energy activity projection in industrial, commercial, and other sector, use macroeconomic and demographic projection result. And for energy intensity projection, for the baseline scenario, we use the correlation between energy intensity and GDP. That's we will show you on the next slide. What about for the projection energy supply? We use the least cost optimization approach. And for the power demand cost data, we obtain from technology data for Indonesian power sector, catalog for generating and storage of electricity, published by MEMR, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So this is the approach, final energy analysis for the industrial and commercial sector, useful energy analysis for the household, and stock turnover for the transport sector. Why we use stock analysis for the transport sector? Because we want to model sales, we want to include sales policies, sales policy. So this is the, especially on the road transport, we use stock analysis, and you see here there is an example of the study from Bloomberg that they use like S-curve of sigmoid function or logistic function, to model electric vehicle. So that's why we use the similar methodology, similar technique, so we apply a sigmoid function, a curve, for the survival rate, for the adoption, for the sales in the transport sector. And you see here, this is in the graph, there's a number of vehicle projection in the NZT scenario, because we have 3 scenarios. Basically, we have 2 scenarios, but NZ scenario 1 is without CCR, CCS CCUS, and NZE 2 is NZE 1 is with CCS CCUS, but NZE 2 is without CCS CCUS. So this is number of vehicle projection in the NZE scenario. So you see the total number of vehicle will be 300 million vehicles, but most of them is a motorcycle, most of the this vehicle projection is the motorcycle, because Indonesian people like using motorcycles, so you see here is the big part of the vehicle. And then after we project, and then we must do cross check. We use the data from 206 countries in the world, data about vehicle stock per 1,000 capita, and GDP per capita. So if we make a correlation, between these 2 variable, and then we will get a nonlinear regression, and we use this for for checking if our projection is not quite far from the line. So this is the number of vehicle in 2021, 2050, and 2060. Vehicles in this graph is just include cars, buses, and trucks, no motorbikes, because it's in the data, most of the data just include cars, buses, but no motorcycle. I just mentioned before, but what about to project the energy intensity or electricity intensity? We use the correlation between the energy intensity and the GDP. And you see here we can get the correlation and also the equation, yeah, for the between electricity per capita and GDP per capita in the household sector, and then industrial electricity intensity versus industrial GDP in the industrial sector, and also between commercial electricity intensity and commercial GDP in the commercial sector. In the household, we see the perfect correlation, yeah, perfect linear correlation, but in the industrial, strong, not linear, but non-linear correlation. And in the commercial sector, we see that the electricity intensity is no longer sensitive to the increasing commercial GDP and tends to be constant. We use this for the baseline projection, yeah, for the energy intensity.
Excuse me, Joko.
Yes,
5 minutes more.
5 minutes more. So then, okay. So this is the word energy intensity. So you see that energy intensity reduction is about, from the 1990 to 2019 is the world energy intensity fell by around 34%. So that's why we use this number to project the energy intensity in the future, yeah? And we assume that the energy intensity or electricity will fall, yeah, 35% until 2060. So this is cost optimization. I would skip, yeah. And then this is load curve also, yeah. So we cannot use the time slice from PLN because the time slice of the load PLN is 17,280 time slice. So we reduce to until just 69 time slices. So this is the resources, renewable energy potential resources. So I don't want, because Pak Yanis already mentioned about this, so I will skip. And this is the result. So there's, you see here, this is the final energy demand by sector, type, and scenario. Final energy demand in 2060 is going to reach 653 million ton oil equivalent in the BAU scenario, and 401 million ton oil equivalent in the net zero emission. Yeah, or grows at 3.5% for the BAU scenario and 2.2% for the NZE scenario per year. Renewable in the demand sector includes new and renewable energy like biomass, biogas, biofuel, and so on. Electricity share is getting higher due to the use of heat pumps, electrical boilers, which replace equipment using fossil fuel like coal, gas, petroleum product. You see here, yeah, the electricity share is increasing, coal is decreasing, gas is increasing, because we are going to do energy transition. Yeah. This is the this is the result, the result of final energy intensity and final energy per capita. For the intensity, yeah, the last 20 years is decreasing, so that's why we estimate that the energy intensity will continue decreasing. And what about the energy per capita? Because it's increasing for the last 20 years, and then we estimate that the energy per capita is also increasing, but the growth rate is different. Yeah. So in the NZE is more not quite big as in the BAU scenario. So this is the electricity demand by sector, electricity per capita. So the electricity demand in 2060 is reaching 2,450 terawatt-hour for PAU scenario and 1,847 terawatt-hour for in the NZE scenario. If we break down into sector, then we see that the transport sector, have shared 20% in 2060. So the electricity demand in transport sector is growing quite high because of the high adoption of or penetration of electric vehicles. What about per capita? Electricity per capita is also increasing. This is the power generation capacity by type. By type, this is for the NZE1 scenario. So you see here, we use coal fire with CCS and combined cycle with CCS also. So this is the total power generation capacity in this scenario is 140 gigawatt. This is 20 gigawatt less than the total capacity of the PAU scenario that I do not have this. I don't present here in this presentation. I don't have in this presentation. So the total is 550. From period 2022 under 23, we refer the number of RUPT-LPLN. Also in the scenario NZT2, in the period of 2030, we refer the RUPT-LPLN. So in the NZT2 scenario, we don't apply CCS. We exclude. So that's why the total population capacity rise to 609 gigawatt. So it's about 50 gigawatt more than the PAU scenario and about 70 gigawatt more than NZE1 scenario, because we do not have a fossil power plant with CCS in this. But what about this is just comparison, so this is easier if you want to compare between among scenarios. But what about the total discounted cost of these three scenarios? You see here the PAU, of course, because this PAU is the least total discounted cost. And then after that, NZT2 is a scenario that we don't have fossil fired power plant with CCS, and NZE1 is the highest, using discounted 10%. And then what about the LCOA? Levelized cost of electricity, and also the investment cost. The LCOA here using a discounted cost, but for the investment cost using real cost. You see here for the PAU scenario, the LCOE is 7.78 cent per kilowatt hour. NZE1 is 8.22 cent US dollar per kilowatt hour, and also NZE2 scenario is 8.16. So the highest is scenario of NZE1 using CCS. What about the investment cost? The lowest is the PAU scenario. The highest is the NZE2, is scenario where we don't have CCUS, 936, because we have about 60 more gigawatt. So that's explain why this is the highest investment cost.
1 minute.
Yes, almost. This is the greenhouse emissions. The carbon price is still in progress. And then this is the power generation capacity by time slice. In 2022, fossil fuels still dominate the power generation, but in 2060, you see here in the scenario NZE1, so the battery energy storage, will take a role, yeah, especially in charging and discharging, yeah, and also in the scenario NZ2 in 2060, yeah, because the capacity of the solar PV is higher than NZ1. So you see here the power generation is the area of the power generation, yeah, is bigger than the NZ1. So then and you see here in the battery energy system, battery energy storage system, the area of the charging and discharging is bigger, yeah, in the NZ2 compared to NZ1 because of the number of bits is higher than NZ1. I think that's okay. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much Pak Joko Santosa atas presentasinya yang sangat menarik dan tentunya kita memperoleh gambaran wawasan ke depan terkait pengembangan energi berkelanjutan, energi baru terbarukan di Indonesia. Well, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, we have already finished to hear Mr. Janis Lenger and Mr. Joko Santosa presentation. Now it's time to open the floor for questions and discussion. Please raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. Please mention your name and also your question. Baik Bapak Ibu sekalian, pertama-tama kami mengundang 3 orang dari Bapak Ibu yang hadir di ruangan rapat ini untuk menyampaikan pertanyaan atau respon terkait paparan dari Mr. Janis dan juga Mr. Joko yang tadi sangat menarik dan tentunya useful, ya. Dan mohon menyebutkan nama dan institusinya. Kami persilakan dari Bapak Ibu yang hadir di sini. Barangkali ada yang dari Kementerian atau Menko, kami persilakan.
So I see the question by Pa Andrew. If I understand it correctly, the question is about, okay, how can, wait a second. Yeah, about the consistency of the regulations and how that can be protected. Yeah, that's an excellent question because indeed the regulations, they change quite frequently. Good example is the BPP scheme, then like first feed-in tariff scheme, then BPP, then back to feed-in tariff, and the tariffs, they change quite a lot. And for one study that we made, we were like, okay, if we take the range of tariffs that existed in the last 10 years, if we take that into account, and from a banker's perspective, try to see, okay, how bankable and how worthy of investment are renewables, then we found that it's pretty bad because you barely have any planning security. So if investors don't know what tariffs or what revenues they can expect, like even 3 or 5 years from now, then yeah, they're quite hesitant to invest in renewables in Indonesia. So something like what the government did last year, that they say, okay, you have a feed-in tariff and this applies for at least 10 years. Is already a very, very good step forward in my view, because it gives you the security for at least 10 years and you know for sure what tariff you will receive for 10 years. So that can be one step. And what we also saw from other governments was that you really have a compliance segment in the government that really makes sure that, okay, what was said 10 years ago, that it still applies today, and that they're really held accountable. Like I'm not an Indonesian myself, so perhaps I lack the local expertise about how politics work in Indonesia, but perhaps something like that could be a good approach. I don't know.
Would you like to respond?
Andre Cahyo.
Yeah.
Terima kasih.
Yeah.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Rip. Terima kasih Pak Cahyo. memang benar ya, kita memang sedang berusaha untuk membuat suatu formulasi kebijakan yang memang semua tidak dirugikan dan semuanya diuntungkan. Itu yang paling penting sebetulnya ya. Dan memang untuk itu perlu proses seperti itu ya, perlu proses yang tidak mudah karena kita negara yang majemuk, negara kepulauan ya, dan kemampuan kita juga masih terbatas ya. Itu yang memang perlu disadari oleh pemerintah dan semua stakeholder. Bagaimana kita mensinergikan semua sumber daya yang kita punya ya Bapak Ibu ya, untuk membuat suatu kebijakan yang benar-benar terarah dan seperti yang Pak Cahyo ingin tadi yang konsisten ya. Karena memang tidak mudah untuk menghandle suatu negara besar Indonesia yang multi segalanya Bapak Ibu ya. Beda dengan kalau kita satu kontinen, itu akan mudah sekali. Tapi karena kita adalah negara yang besar, kepulauan ya, yang tidak mudah. Even level provinsi pun, saya pernah datang ke Sulawesi Utara bahwa ada satu pulau yang untuk mencapai kesananya itu susah sekali ya. Nah, kayak seperti itu contoh kecilnya Pak. Jadi memang semua harus bersinergi, kita mencoba semua membuat suatu perencanaan yang efektif ya. Dan tentu saja harus semua dampak harus dikaji sebelum kita mengeluarkan kebijakan yang baru. Ya. Memang tidak mudah, Pak Andrew ya. Tapi memang kita harus berusaha ke sana. Salah satu adalah NZE ini. Ya. Kita dulu ketika membuat net zero emission, berapa kali perubahannya luar biasa. Karena kita ingin mencari formulasi yang tepat dan sekarang pun juga masih berubah. Ya. Masih berproses. Pak Ibu ya, gitu ya, untuk mencari formula NZT yang apakah kita menggunakan CCS atau kita tidak menggunakan CCS, itu juga masih dalam perbincangan. Makanya kita mencoba membuat suatu kajian bagaimana kalau kita tidak menggunakan CCS dan bagaimana kalau kita menggunakan CCS. Seperti itu Pak Cahyo dari saya. Makasih.
Baik Pak Cahyo. Yang kedua saya baca dari chat dari Bapak Edi Ilmawan, itu menyampaikan sudah ada pemodelan energi yang dilakukan oleh pihak-pihak lain seperti dari DEN, dari UGM, UI dan lain-lain. Apakah ada perbedaan dari hasil pemodelan yang dilakukan oleh BRIN dengan yang dilakukan oleh pihak lain tersebut? Nah, ini terkait hasil yang berbeda, misalnya, apa kira-kira yang menyebabkan hasilnya berbeda itu, Pak? Terima kasih dari Pak Edi Ilmawan, Pak. Ya.
Oke.
Kami persilakan. Mungkin
oke,
Bapak dulu. Ya.
Oke, karena ini pertanyaan Indonesia. Oke, terima kasih Pak Arif, terima kasih Pak Edi pertanyaannya. Jadi memang benar kita ada beberapa model di Indonesia ini, kita beberapa institusi melakukan energy modeling. Tapi kalau kami dari pihak BRIN selalu berusaha untuk tidak keluar dari koridor. Hanya saja mungkin ada sedikit perbedaan, itu tentu saja karena perbedaan metodologinya. Tapi secara prinsip kita masih bisa katakan masih dalam batas-batas yang tidak berbeda sekali. Contohnya Pak Edi, seperti demand listrik, kita juga berusaha untuk membuat suatu model yang menggambarkan kebijakan-kebijakan dari model misalnya di KSDM ya, apakah kita akan bisa mendapatkan satu nilai yang sama, dan ternyata memang tidak begitu berbeda. Memang dalam hal bauran pembangkitnya ini memang sangat debatable ya Bapak Ibu. Kalau kita bicara optimisasi, data akan sangat berperan ya, data cost, data teknis itu sangat berperan. Kadang-kala kelengkapan data juga dari kami juga kurang sempurna, itu juga mungkin menyebabkan perbedaan. Ya. Jadi dalam hal bauran pembangkitnya, dalam hal bauran energinya, ya, dalam hal kapasitasnya. ya. Karena memang kita optimisasi, memang kita harus benar-benar kalau ingin mempunyai suatu hasil yang sama, kita harus menyamakan semua aspek teknis dan aspek biaya, Bapak Ibu. Ya. Tapi dari sisi demand, kita sudah mendapatkan suatu hasil yang tidak jauh berbeda, Pak Edi. Ya. Tapi kalau memang sisi pembangkit, ya memang itu tadi ya, itu yang sangat susah karena optimisasi yang sangat terkait dengan data-data yang harus diinput ke dalam sistem optimisasi tersebut.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Joko. Barangkali ada dari floor atau dari online bisa raise hand. Mungkin dari teman-teman yang hadir di ya. Oh, baik. Baik, Pak Beni, kami persilakan Pak untuk menyampaikan respon atau pertanyaan pada narasumber.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Arif. My question to Mr. Janis Langer. Thank you very much, Mr. Janis, for your presentation. I think your presentation is very excellent for the type renewable energy in Indonesia. In your slide, you asked the type, the Indonesia have 6 type renewable energy. Include solar PV, wind, hydropower, bioenergy, geothermal, ocean energy. But I'm sorry, Mr. Janis, in your result and recommendation, you don't ask about the priority of the solar, the type of renewable energy. My question is, what is the type renewable energy? So very important things in Indonesia. Thank you very much, Mr. James.
Thank you very much, Pak Beni. That's a really, really nice question, and I'm very happy to respond to that. So in terms of prioritization, Indonesia has lots of choices. So most of our results indicated that the most important technology is solar photovoltaics, coupled with storage. But as we know, or at least whenever I visit my in-laws in Semarang, sometimes there's a power outage, so electricity grid is not always stable. And if you introduce electricity like solar energy or wind energy, then perhaps it might make the grid even more unstable unless you reinforce it. So I can see the perspective of some people who say, okay, we need baseload. And also with that, Indonesia has lots of resources, geothermal, biomass, large like reservoir hydro, runoff river hydro. If we talk about more novel technologies, ocean thermal energy conversion can be a very nice base load. So if you ask me which technology should be prioritized, I would say all of them equally. Okay, perhaps not equally. If Indonesia really says, okay, we don't want to buy Chinese solar panels, we don't want to buy, I don't know, South Korean panels, that's fine. But then more investments into domestic manufacturing capacity is necessary. I believe the government now plans to have like a huge facility in Batam. So that can be a very nice first step towards that goal. So yeah, to wrap it up, I think Indonesia has different paths, you know, it can be very heavy on solar, it can be less heavy and have other technologies as well. So Indonesia has a very, very, good situation, I think, on its hand.
So, excuse me, Mr. James, what is your recommendation for us to set up the renewable energy types in Indonesia? Could you please?
Right, to set up the renewable types. Well, it depends on the context, I think. So, for example, Papua has a different situation as Java, for example. So, I would say Java is already pretty crowded, and it's very important that the Indonesian people are as little affected by the energy transition as possible. So farmers should still have their agricultural land, forests should be maintained or even made bigger. So for Java, for example, I would recommend that you would look deeper into transmission lines to other islands. So I'm aware that there are quite a lot of talks about connecting Sumatra and Java. That could be very nice. It could be even nicer to also talk about Kalimantan and Java. I mean, the capital city will move from Jakarta to Kalimantan with Nusantara. So you could establish that link between those two very important regions by also connecting them in terms of electricity transmission. We are aware that it's not so easy. You can easily say, okay, why don't you just connect the links? But you have shipping routes, you have tsunamis, you have earthquakes. So we have a master student who looked deeper into, okay, how can the cables be routed to connect the islands? And we found it is technically possible. It looks like it. We didn't see any KO criteria popping up. So that can be something like that. And for West Kalimantan, you have to be careful. You don't want to interfere with mangroves, with peatland, and those very sensitive ecosystems. So it can be, for example, like, okay, solar PV is in West Kalimantan, electricity is generated there and then transmitted to Java, whereas in the east of Indonesia it can be like standalone systems. So we saw that Maluku can be on its own without problems, Papua, Nusa Tenggara. So it always depends on the context. One overarching recommendation is very difficult, but in our research, we really try to see, okay, the regional contexts, how can you do that? And we hope that we can provide some suggestions for each region.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jenis. I'm sorry, Mr. Ari. I'm from Center Research of Testing Technology and Standard. Thank you.
Arif, it seems like you are mute at this moment.
Yes, Mr. Arif is mute.
Are you here? Okay. Question from Mr. Agus Sugiono. Can you explain further the methodology used in this study? Please explain.
Right. So I didn't touch too much upon that because it's a little bit hard to explain, but I will still try nevertheless. So as said, like the research consists of resource mapping and energy system modeling. So I will touch upon both methodologies quite quickly. So for the mapping process, we basically used two maps. So the two most important properties that those maps have is, for one, the spatial resolution and the temporal resolution. What do those things mean? Spatial resolution basically means how detailed it is in space. So if you have, like, imagine it like little pixels, and each pixel contains, for example, the wind speed, the solar irradiation. So basically the renewable resource that you have to produce electricity. And the smaller the pixels, the more detailed it is to really reflect the resource availability at a particular location. So you have some resource maps that have a high spatial resolution. That means they're really detailed, but they have a poor temporal resolution, which means temporal resolution, how well do you reflect the resource availability through time? So, for example, solar PV, it's very important to have that information because at night there is no sunshine. That means at night there's also no solar electricity, whereas throughout the day you have solar electricity. So we use two maps. One map, for example, the Global Wind Atlas that you can download for free online. It has a very fine spatial resolution, but it only shows average values. So you don't really see the sunshine at night, the night and the day of the solar electricity. And the other map has a very high temporal resolution, but a really bad spatial resolution. So you see those two maps are complementary. And if you combine those two, you have one map that reflects the resource availability very good in time and in space. So what we are using for our research is like 250 by 250 meter pixels with an hourly resource data for 20 years. So that's what we've been mapping. And for the energy system modeling, I don't know whether you've heard of the model, but it's called Calliope. It's an open source energy model. That means it's being developed by hundreds of people across the world, ensuring that it's everything is working correctly and everything is like progressing with the state of the art. And the good thing about Calliope is that you can really reflect the transmission lines. So as you perhaps saw in my slides, you basically have a simplified version of the transmission grid. And then you basically model supply and demand on an hourly resolution. So for each hour of the year, you try to meet demand with the potentials for solar, for wind that you have at hand. Given, like, for example, the day-night cycle of solar PV, the seasonal variations with wind or with hydro. The shortcoming of that model is that you don't have like that detail with the macroeconomics, for example, shown by Joko. For example, we don't have elasticity, we don't have those other elements that also influence demand. But the good thing is that you really can model hourly for several years. Yeah. If you want more information, I can add my email address in the chat and you can just approach me and then I can talk more about that if you want.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chan. Okay, enough, Pak Agus? Okay, thank you very much, Janice. And I will continue to read from the chat box the question from Mr. Wari Aji for both speakers. What are your takes to the recent news about the government plan to relax the solar energy local content requirement? On the other hand, it is still really complicated to sell self-generated renewable energy access to the PLN grid regulation. Please, Mr. Joko, first you. Okay.
Terima kasih. I hope you don't mind, Pak Yanis, I'm answering in Indonesia. Thank you. Oke, memang benar ada rencana pemerintah akan mengurangi tingkat TKDN dari modul surya. Cuma kalau tidak salah itu mungkin akan tahun 2025 kalau tidak salah ya Pak Wari ya. Jadi mungkin menunggu saat industri solar cell itu sudah siap Indonesia. Karena saat ini Indonesia sedang membangun industri solar cell dengan kapasitas besar, beberapa sedang melakukan investasi di situ. Lalu bagaimana katanya dengan penjualan listrik, kelebihan produksi listrik ke PLN? Ya memang ini yang tadi seperti tadi ya, tadi ada pertanyaan konsistensi ya, tadi Pak siapa tadi memang ya. Yang jelas ada jelas pada saat itu pasti nanti akan pemerintah akan berusaha untuk ya harusnya ya pemerintah harus mencari cara bagaimana supaya semuanya win-win solution begitu ya Pak Ibu ya. Sampai saat itu pun kita pun juga masih belum ada satu regulasi yang mendukung untuk menjual kelebihan listrik ya. Ya saya cuma bisa berkata bahwa ketika semua bergerak ke arah X, kalau ada satu yang tidak bergerak ke arah X, itu akan susah sekali Bapak Ibu ya. Itu artinya begitu Bapak Ibu ya. Jika semua bergerak ke arah situ, ada satu atau dua entitas yang tidak bergerak ke arah situ, ya mereka akan mengalami kesulitan sendiri, ya. Makanya itu kita sekarang sudah ada globalisasi ya Pak Ibu ya. Jadi kita tidak bisa lagi hidup sendiri atau berusaha untuk, karena perkembangan sesuatu itu tidak tahu akan berdampak pada kita, ya. Contohnya juga climate change, ya. Suka tidak suka ini juga berdampak pada kita, dan kita harus berusaha merubah dari fosil ke EBT. Kita cari rumusan yang tepat supaya semuanya happy, Bapak Ibu ya. Itu yang memang tidak mudah, saya yakin. Tapi intinya kita tidur Pak Farid ya. Ketika semua bergerak satu tujuan, ada satu yang tidak mau bergerak ke arah situ, ya akan susah nanti. Harusnya bagaimana dengan kondisi yang ada itu berusaha untuk istilahnya supaya tidak memberikan kerugian terlalu besar. Intinya tetap masih bisa mendapatkan manfaat. Nah, itu yang harus dilakukan ya. Bagaimana caranya? Saya yakin banyak sekali orang pandai di Indonesia, dalam institusi, di Indonesia ya. Bagaimana kalau contohnya seperti ini ya Pak Ibu ya. Kalau dilihat sekarang sedang pertarungan antara hidrogen dengan listrik. Kalau hidrogen itu didukung oleh industri migas, dan listrik itu didukung oleh utility. Ini mereka berusaha untuk mencapai mana yang the best gitu ya, mana yang nanti akan dan semuanya bergerak ke arah situ. Begitu Pak Ibu ya. Contohnya seperti itu. Bukannya mereka lalu tidak bergerak ke arah situ, tapi semua bergerak ke arah situ. Hidrogen bergerak, EV bergerak, listrik bergerak. Jadi mencari suatu solusi yang terbaik begitu Bapak Ibu ya. Mungkin dari saya itu aja, mungkin Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih.
Ya. Terima kasih Pak Joko. Maybe Mr. Janis, please comment for this question. Maybe related to your experience from your country, maybe from Germany or Netherlands. Please, Mr. Janis.
Yeah, unfortunately, I could not understand much of what Pak Joko was saying. So if I repeat myself, or repeat what Pak Joko already said, then I'm sorry. It's indeed a quite complicated question because it also touches upon the circumstances that PLN has to deal with. Personally, I think the lift of the solar energy local content requirement, I think is very nice, because I think it has been holding back solar PV in Indonesia quite considerably. You raised the issue of privately owned rooftop PV, and that is certainly an issue, because every kilowatt hour that is generated by the customers is something that PLN doesn't have to deliver, so they lose revenue. That's understandable. My perspective is more on the utility scale land, the really big solar parks, not the rooftop PV. So because that's also where Indonesia really can make a big impact. Rooftop PV, I think, is mostly something that is useful for the end users, to reduce their private electricity bill, but perhaps not so much, to really make a big impact on climate change mitigation. So I think it's nice because it gives Indonesia the chance to learn from international expertise. It might help them to manufacture domestic Indonesian panels better, meaning more efficiently and cheaper. And then once the expertise is strong enough, Indonesia can manufacture world-class panels themselves, and then the local content rule can come back. So, based on German experience, that's a little bit hard to compare, because Germany has a free electricity market. It's not state regulated. We also have a clear separation between generation, transmission, and distribution companies. Those are completely disconnected from each other, so it's not a vertically integrated company like PLN. But how Germany did it in the past was that you basically have a huge government fund, and you use that government fund to give money to the rooftop PV owners. So it's basically a feed-in tariff scheme. And 20 years ago, 15 years ago, those feed-in tariffs were quite high. So we're talking here about like 40, 50 cents per kilowatt hour. So it was quite huge because PV used to be really expensive back then. Nowadays, it's below 10 cents per kilowatt hour. But it also drove up the electricity bills for consumers quite a lot. So if in Indonesia, the electricity bill is like below 1 cent per kilowatt hour, 3 cents per kilowatt hour. In Germany, it's nowadays more than 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's quite complicated because then hundreds of other questions arise. So if you want to liberalize the market, and how can you do that with an Indonesian constitution? And can you really communicate 30 cents per kilowatt hour to the Indonesian end users? I doubt it. So how this can be solved, I think this can be a whole other research on its own.
Okay, we wrap now. Okay, I would like to. Thank you, Mr. Yanis. I would like to read about question from Ibu Ira. I would like to ask Mr. Yanis regarding investment cost. In your presentation, it is stated that the total investment cost will be reduced if there is an interconnected between islands. However, the result of Pak Joko database, net zero emission will increase the investment cost, which means an installation of new renewable energy-based power plant, which give the decarbonization result will increase total investment cost. How can you explain this problem? Please, Mr. Yanis.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very good question, which perfectly captures the issue of energy system modeling and scenarios in general. So the results from your modeling always depend on your assumptions. And if you have different assumptions, you get different results. So comparing different studies with each other is quite a challenge. It's very difficult. So to be quite honest with you, I don't know which assumptions really flowed into Joko's database. It depends, like, for example, do you have those inter-island links to begin with? Which costs do you assume? Do you assume whether costs decline in the future or not? So one important detail that I must mention with our research is that we don't assume present costs, but projected future costs. So to give you an example, 15 years ago, solar PV costed roughly 4,000 euros per kilowatt peak if you wanted to install a solar system. Nowadays, we're talking about price of 500 euros. So from 4,000 euros per kilowatt peak 15 years ago, today to 500. Because you have learning, you do things better, you have technological progress, so costs usually decline pretty strongly. Indonesia has not yet enjoyed from these cost reductions. So we argue if Indonesia ramps up the development of solar PV, it will become cheaper in the future. So we play around a little bit in our assumptions and say, okay, what if Indonesia also has like 500 euros per kilowatt peak by 2050 or something? And that might explain why our system costs decline in the future, because we just assume that those costs will reduce compared to today. We also did an alternative scenario where we said, okay, what if the costs don't decrease in the future? What if they stay exactly like they are today? And then we also found, okay, with all the additional investments you need in transmission, you would have an increasing system cost. But quite frankly, we think that this scenario is quite unlikely, because once Indonesia really gains momentum and starts implementing more and more and more renewables, we do believe that it will also get cheaper in Indonesia. Yeah.
Okay. Please, if you any comment?
Can I give a little comment? Sorry, it's echoing.
Afri? Langsung. Oh, Ibu Ira. Enggak, Bu Ira.
Okay, can you hear my voice, Mr. Jens? Hello?
I cannot hear it very well. Sorry.
Di sini. Ini aja. Bu. Iya.
Can you hear my voice, Mr. Janice?
Perfect. Now it's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your response. But I would like to know if you already consider about the cost of transmission line. Because as you know, Indonesia is archipelago country, yeah. So it is not enough just a line. I mean, it is only land line in the land, yeah. But it is also in the ocean, and also it's just, as you know, it's very expensive. So it is, if you already consider about this, so you I mean, why the result is, I mean, reducing the total cost. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Like, you raised really, really good points. I completely agree with you. So to answer your question, yes, we did take into account both investment and maintenance costs of transmission lines. And you're absolutely right. There will be heavy investments required into transmission infrastructure. As I said, it's a work in progress. It's not completed yet. And one of the things that we still have to do is to play around with the transmission costs a little bit more. So the assumptions that we use right now, they are on average from literature, but we have not looked into worst case scenarios where the investment costs are like 2 or 3 times as high. We are also quite curious how that changes the results, but unfortunately, that's still we still have to do that in the next weeks. What I can say, though, is that the transmission costs are just a part of the total system costs, and it's always about the relationship between, okay, costs on the one hand, but benefits on the other. And based on the results that we have right now, it seems like the benefits from choosing the cheapest, most cost-effective generation technologies are larger than the costs that you have to, invest to, have the transmission lines. So, for example, West Kalimantan solar power is really, really cheap. It's a very nice source. It's relatively close by. It's at least closer than, say, Sumba Island, which is even better. But yeah, like we need to do further research to really make sure, okay, is this message of the island, like the inter-island links, is that really solid? And does it also apply if the transmission costs are higher than expected? You're absolutely right in this regard. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to
ask about how did you become interested in research of renewable energy in Indonesia, and what you're motivated to pursue this field? Yes, please.
Yeah, this is a quite personal question, honestly, but I'm happy to respond to that. So renewable energies were always my passion topic. So, starting from bachelor studies in Germany, I was always quite invested. Actually, like I first started being very interested in fossil generation. So gas turbines were my most favorite machine there is on Earth. But then I moved to the renewables, luckily. And during the master studies in the Netherlands, I got to know my wife. And then I heard, it was the first time I heard about Indonesia, quite honestly. I mean, I knew the country exists, but I had no particular interest in it. But then, when you have an Indonesian partner, then you inevitably get more interested into the country, privately and professionally. And then when this PhD position opened up about renewables in Indonesia, I was thinking, okay, this is the perfect chance to, get a foot in the door, with Indonesian energy transition, because we do consider to move there one day. And as I said in my presentation, it's really important to me that whatever I do with the Indonesian transition benefits the Indonesian people. Yes, I am a orang bule, yeah. I'm not an Indonesian, so local context and cultural is not the same. But if my knowledge helps, to promote this topic, then I'm very happy to do that. And that's basically what motivates me every day to work on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Janis. Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, tak terasa waktu webinar kita telah selesai. Sekarang sudah jam 3 lebih. Alhamdulillah, memang luar biasa tantangan kita ke depan dalam merealisasikan target net zero emission di tahun 2060 di Indonesia. Mudah-mudahan insya Allah target net zero emission tersebut dapat tercapai dengan didukung tentunya potensi energi baru terbarukan di Indonesia yang sangat besar. Terima kasih kepada kedua narasumber yang luar biasa ini. Thank you very much, Mr. Janis Rader and Mr. Joko Santosa. Terima kasih yang telah semangat mengikuti acara webinar ini sampai selesai. Alhamdulillah, kepada semuanya kami ucapkan terima kasih. Semoga webinar ini penuh manfaat dan tentunya juga akan menambah wawasan kita untuk menuju Indonesia emas tahun 2045 dan juga Indonesia net zero emission tahun 2060. Baik Bapak Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, mohon maaf apabila ada kekurangan dan kesalahan. Kami ucapkan sekian. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Waktu kami kembalikan kepada Ibu Ais sebagai Master of Ceremony. Kami persilakan Ibu Ais.
Thank you Pak Arif sudah memandu acara diskusi webinar kita hari ini. And we would like to thank Mr. Janis and Mr. Joko Santosa who have shared your knowledge with all of us. And we would like to thank the audience for your participation and interest in our topic. We believe that the information presented here will be beneficial to all who attend. We hope that this webinar will inspire you to take action towards your goals. We also hope that this webinar has provided you all with useful information and strategies that you can implement in your institution. If you have any additional question or want to learn more about the topics we discussed today, please feel free to reach out to our team. Before we say goodbye, I want to share some pantun mewakili Pak Cu. Sorry, Mr. Janis, I will read pantun in bahasa. Mohon maaf semuanya, saya mewakili Pak Cu membacakan pantun. Pergi menikah di KUA. Hati deg-degan dan bergetar. Terima kasih untuk hadirin semua karena kita sudah berkenan mengikuti webinar. One more. Mengurus sapi di peternakan. Sapinya diberi nama Ina. Mudah-mudahan nggak ada namanya ya di sini. Sampai jumpa saya ucapkan. Semoga webinar kali ini memberi banyak makna. As we come the end of our webinar. Yes. As we come to the end of our webinar, thank you again for joining us today. We appreciate your time and hope to see you again in next webinar. Akhir kata dari saya, selamat melanjutkan kembali aktivitasnya. Goodbye and assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Mohon izin saya
Mohon izin.
meninggalkan ruangan. Terima kasih semuanya.
Oke, terima kasih Bu.